My friend Andy Staples, kind enough to spend some time with us here today on the podcast. First of all, Andy, welcome in. Nice to see you.
Good to see you, Neil, and actually see you. We're not doing this all audio now.
I know. We're getting older. You're aging better than I am. I'm starting to the age spots are starting to show and stuff like that. It's a little depressing sometimes to look at myself. But welcome to.
I got a person. That's what my wife does for a living, so it helps.
There you go.
She's the best Botox shooter in 3 counties. So,
you did a deep dive into the Ole Miss offense, which was really interesting. And we were saying before we got started, you covered Baylor a lot back during the Art Briles era when all of that was going on. So you knew a lot about what was happening there, and there's a lot of a Baylor connection to what Ole Miss is doing. And I was saying it's a sign of the times, I guess, that when you write a story like the one you wrote today, which was a deep dive, you had to include, hey, look, I'm mentioning Baylor, but we're not talking about that Baylor. We're talking about the football Baylor.
Yeah, the football part of it has to kind of be separated out from what happened and what got Art Briles fired. And you think about it, you fire the football coach, the AD, and the president. There's some bad stuff going on. So that, which is also very interesting. I mean, the football part of it is not bad. It's just an interesting thing that it was an offense that people really struggled to stop, and people really struggled to understand what they were doing. And it's one that Lane Kiffin looked at when he was at Alabama, because he was looking at a lot of different offenses. He was looking at what Ohio State was doing, what Oregon was doing. He was basically just trying to find pieces of things that he could attach to Alabama's offense that would help make it better. And he was very intrigued by what Baylor did, not so much in the pass game, but in the run game. You know, Baylor did that veer and shoot, and they were all about running it between the tackles if you would let them. And they would lead the Big 12 in rushing a lot of years. And so when Lane got to FAU, he hired Kendall Briles to run the offense, and they had Devin Singletary. And I mean, if you watch the NFL, you see Devin Singletary playing for the Bills now. You know how good he is. Imagine him against Conference USA defenses that are just gassed because you just hit a 30-yard pass on them, and now they're coming with him, 10 seconds later.
Yeah, it's the not the knock on Kiffin, but the reputation on Kiffin that people always get wrong is, at least in my opinion, is that he's this wide open, pass happy guy. And I'm like, well, he can be, but that's not really all that he does. What he did at Alabama that made him so good, at least I think, and you're better at this than I am, is he took the personnel that he had, kind of took his offense and molded it around what they did best. If it was running the football, if it was throwing the football, if it was some mix in between, he could take different types of quarterbacks, make them effective. But then what he is a genius at, and I do think that's the right word, is seeing in real time what the defense is giving him. And taking it in real time. Not at halftime, but
right in. Steve Spurrier was great at that. He could see things on the field that other people couldn't even see in the press box. And there's just people like that who have sort of an innate ability to understand where the defense is and how it works. But there's a lot to this, and I think it's interesting because they didn't have a spring practice. One of the more impressive things this coaching staff at Ole Miss has done is get those guys ready to do this, especially the tempo part of it, without as much time to rep it. That's the thing you want to do during spring practice and preseason practice, and they didn't have time to do any of that. And I think it showed. I think if you watch the Florida game, they're a little bit slower. You see the receivers looking back at the sideline, kind of going, "Am I lined up right? Is this what I'm supposed to do?" There was none of that in the Alabama game. There was a sequence in the Alabama game, I think it was in the second quarter, where they went from a 3rd and 5 to a 4th and 1. And the 3rd and 5 play, they're nuclear wide. There's a receiver outside the numbers on the top of the field and a receiver outside the numbers on the bottom of the field. And then there's 2 slot guys, and you put the 1 slot guy in motion, which was Yeboah, I think, and they hand off. And they gained 4 yards. So you got 4th and 1. Now, you want to go fast in that situation, catch the defense off guard. But what's impressive about them going fast, they didn't just line up in the same formation again. The next formation they lined up in, they're on the left hash now. They had been in the middle of the field, so now they're on the left hash. So if you're watching it on TV, they're on the bottom hash, and there's 3 receivers on the bottom side. And then they got Yeboah, who's attached as a tight end, which means he's in a 3-point stance next to the tackle, also on the left side. So all 4 of your pass catching options minus the back are on the left side. And Yeboah is in a place where he hardly ever lines up. So they got lined up for that play in 7 seconds. They snapped it at 10. 7 seconds to do that. That's what killed the defense, because it winds up being just a handoff to, I believe, Snoop Connor, and it may have been Ely, but he bounces it to the right and just goes forever, because there is no one from the Alabama defense on the right side. And you say, well, why didn't you just put somebody out there? Well, because you have 3 receivers down at the bottom. Yeah. If you put a corner on the other side, they're just going to throw to one of those receivers. And I mean, that's the stuff that really stresses defense. If you only have 7 seconds to deal with that, you're not going to handle it very well usually.
If you've ever played defense, you know that there's a lot of communication that has to happen with defense. You've got to get a coverage call. You've got to make sure you're in the right alignment, the right personnel, people. Where's the tight end? Where's the strong side? You're doing all of those things. Well, communication does take a little bit of time. And if you're getting plays off in 8, 9, 10 seconds, that defense doesn't have time to get their play called. Forget stealing signals and stuff. There are no signals to steal.
There's no signals to worry about. And that's the funny thing. I was laughing when I heard that. And I think Saban was kind of joking about that. People took that and ran with it. But there are no signals that matter in that situation. I mean, if you look at Alabama's defense, they were thoroughly confused, because I don't think Ole Miss had used that formation to that point in the game. I'm trying to remember if they used it in the Florida-Kentucky game. Maybe they did. But the most impressive thing to me is that they could get them to do that, to, get the signal in from the sideline, or whether they signaled 2 plays at once. The previous play, I'm not sure exactly how they did it. But the fact that they could get lined up properly in 7 seconds in a formation that looked nothing like the previous formation on a different part of the field. I mean, that usually takes a lot of months of repetition to get right. That's typically a false start, or an illegal procedure, or not enough men on the line of scrimmage waiting to happen.
Yep. Somebody doesn't get lined up right, and because you're not communicating with the line judge. Hey, am I on? Am I off? Who gets the credit for that? It's not just Kiffin, right? Because it's Jeff Lebby does a terrific.
Oh, Jeff Lebby, absolutely. Because if you watch UCF's offense last year, the formations look very similar. This is the Baylor stuff. When you see receivers on both sides of the formation outside the numbers, that's that Baylor offense. Dino Babers runs it at Syracuse. Kendall Briles runs it at Arkansas. So I wonder if this week's going to be a little bit tougher for Ole Miss's offense, because Arkansas's defense sees a lot of these concepts every day in practice. It's not going to be as much of a shock to their system. So, but that's what it is. And it's interesting because it was very secretive. There was kind of only a few people who really knew that offense back in the mid 20-teens. And so it didn't proliferate the way that what Chip Kelly was doing did, and the way that what Rich Rodriguez was doing did, because those guys would share with everybody. And you could come in. Now, you couldn't always come in with Kelly, but if Urban Meyer wanted to come in, he'd let him come in, and they'd talk. And so a lot of ideas got passed around. That one stayed pretty much a closed system until the last year or two, when you had Lebby, and he was looking for a job, and Randy Clement, who's their offensive line coach, who's with Jeff Lebby. I mean, they were at this little tiny school in Polk County, Florida for a little bit, and then they got moving back up the chain. But then you had Kendall, who's been at FAU, Houston, Florida State, and now Arkansas. So those ideas are now sort of out in the world. So you'll see defenses catch up.
Yeah, this is going to be an interesting week because of that, because Barry Odom's not going to have to go very far to get some. Hey, what are they do? What are they trying?
Hey, Kendall, what'd you do here? What would you do here?
Yeah, exactly. It's going to be.
What would drive you crazy here?
And Lane and Lebby know that's happening too, so they'll be adjusted to that. It'll be a very fast chess match. There won't be a lot of thinking. It'll be quick. But one of the things that I thought was so interesting with Kiffin going into this season was and I'm not looping you in this group, there was a lot of lazy national media that kept just going, John Rice Plumlee, John Rice Plumlee. And I'm like, yeah, but John Rice Plumlee doesn't really fit what Kiffin would ultimately like to do as well as Matt Corral might. Because as you point out in your story, Corral's a much better athlete than people give him credit for.
Corral's a very good athlete. I mean,
exactly.
The thing is, a lot of those plays against Alabama, yes, schematically they were very well done, but they don't work if Matt Corral can't escape a sack every once in a while. And because that's people are like, okay, I read a story like this and they say, well, you make it sound like it's impossible to beat them. Like, it's not impossible to beat. If you got good defensive linemen, just throw their offensive linemen to the side and get in the quarterback's face. It doesn't work. Those plays don't work.
So let me ask you this about Kiffin. I get this question. I do a mailbag every Wednesday, and I was working on it early this morning, and I've got, 3 or 4 questions about essentially, hey, can we keep Lane Kiffin here? How fast does he leave? Does he leave at the end of this year? And my answer is always, at least right now, is, guys, he's coached 3 games. Let's slow your roll, relax. You know Kiffin a little bit a lot better than I do, certainly. And you're one of those guys that I think when you pick up the phone and call into a program, they take your call. When you just look at Ole Miss from, I guess, your perspective, which is a pretty, probably 30,000 feet with a really good camera. When you look at it, do you see a Lane Kiffin that could stay at Ole Miss for a period of time, or do you see a guy who's got wanderlust already?
Well, here's the deal. So they just played Alabama. They did not win the game. Alabama has the best talent in the country, the second best talent in the country, the third. At the very worst, it would have the 4th best talent in the country. Yeah. And I don't think that's the case. I think it's probably 1, 2, or 3.
Okay.
They were a couple stops away from winning that game, Neil, with the personnel they inherited on defense. So if they can keep recruiting well on offense, and look, if I'm a quarterback, I'd want to play in this offense. I texted Lane yesterday and said, if I'm a tight end and I watch Kenny Yeboah in this offense, I want to play in it because they do with him all the things an NFL team wants to do with a tight end. But if they can,
they use in the NFL right now, yeah,
exactly right. If they can upgrade the personnel on defense, they can compete in the West. Now, I don't know that they can win it year in, year out, but they can be competitive in the West, much in the way that they were like 2014, 2015. I think that's possible. You put the 2015 defensive personnel with this year's offensive personnel, that's a pretty tough team to beat. So now here's the thing. The way you can do that now is going to change because the transfer rules are about to change. You're about to get the one-time free transfer to anywhere. So if they are good and, they've already adjusted their scouting department at Ole Miss to do this. And that's what a lot of schools are doing. What you're going to see is the recruiting departments at most schools are going to mimic NFL scouting departments where there's actually 2 prongs of it. There's in the NFL, you've got the guys who scout the college players to see who they want to draft, but they also have the guys who scout the other NFL teams to see who they might want to pick up when they get cut or see who they might want to sign in free agency. Yeah. So colleges are going to do this too. And they already have. Almost all the SEC schools have already started to separate this, where they'll have a scouting department that looks at guys who are currently in college who might be good transfer candidates. And then they'll look at the guys out of high school. Now, I still think you have to build off guys from high school, but you can fill in. And in a situation like Ole Miss, where you have one side of the ball that's pretty good and the personnel is pretty good, and the other side of the ball where the personnel is not very good, you can upgrade personnel quickly using the transfer portal. Or because they're in Mississippi, they're very familiar with using the JUCO rank. So there's a lot of ways to do this. And I think it's possible. I mean, you saw them go toe-to-toe, at least their offense against the other team's defense, with Florida and Alabama. Those are 2 of the best teams in the SEC and 2 of the best teams in the country. So it's not that far off. It's not like they can't compete there. And my thing with coaches leaving and all that, like, I think Mark Stoops has the best job in the world.
Yeah.
Because Mark Stoops can win 8 games a year and they'll build him a statue. If Mark Stoops goes one rung up in the college football hierarchy, 8 wins a year gets him run out of town. But he can win 8 games a year. They'll pay him $5 million or $6 million a year, and everybody's happy. So Tom Allen in Indiana, same thing. Jeff Brom at Purdue, same thing. If you're in the Big Ten or the SEC and you're at a place where you don't have to win 12 games a year, but every once in a while you might be able to cycle up and have a team that competes for the conference title, which in the SEC means you can compete for the national title, I'm not sure you want to go anywhere else. I'm not sure it's wise.
It's the thing about Kiffin that's interesting. And again, I don't know him that well. I mean, obviously I'm covering him, but it's been in a pandemic. And so you don't have an opportunity to build relationships really yet. What's interesting to me about him is that he's a guy who I think has gotten comfortable in his own skin, maybe for the first time in his life, sort of knows who he is. He doesn't want all of the celebrity, the day-to-day celebrity. He wants to be able to go to Florida, to California, go deep sea fishing, go hang out with his kids. He wants to have that freedom. And at a place like Ole Miss, you can have that. At a place like Alabama, I don't know how much of that you really get because of just the demands on your time.
Well, there's also 2 factors involved there. One, he has been the head coach at USC, and he's been the head coach of the Oakland Raiders. So he knows what that's like. He knows what that life is like. He's been the head coach at Tennessee too.
Yeah.
So he's experienced that. So he doesn't have to wonder what that's going to be like. He already knows. The other factor is there's still a little trepidation among notoriously risk-averse athletic directors about Lane Kiffin. So that narrows the pool of schools at that level that would try to hire him. But I'm sure 1 or 2 will if he wins at Ole Miss. If he's successful at Ole Miss, one of those will come calling at some point. Then it'll just be a matter of personal preference on his part. But the thing is, if you're in the SEC, you can pay to keep somebody. Doesn't matter who you are. You can afford it. And then how much do they like being there? Do they appreciate that they don't have to win 12 games a year? Because I think that's what, like, Dan Mullen, I think, is running into that now. Mullen's getting killed because they lost a game to Texas A&M. Okay, that's a good Texas A&M team, a veteran Texas A&M team on the road. They lost because they fumbled and Texas A&M kicked a field goal when, if they hadn't fumbled, Florida would kick that field goal and won. So it wasn't like they went in there and got blown out. But Mullen's getting savaged this week.
Yeah,
that's what happens at those programs. That's what you get. And Dan Mullen has won double-digit games each of the last 2 years and may win double-digit games again this year. So it's just it's different, and you have to be willing to accept that. And I think what makes Lane interesting is that in his 30s, he already experienced all that. And it maybe gives you a different perspective when you're in your 40s and 50s.
You talked about the rest of Ole Miss's schedule. They've already played Florida. They've already played Alabama. They don't play Georgia. The rest of their games, there's
winnable.
There's one game that looks like an automatic win, and that's Vanderbilt. They don't appear to have anything. And then the other games, starting with the one Saturday in Fayetteville against Arkansas, are games that are all winnable. And with that defense,
yeah. But you notice I'm not saying they're gonna win any of them because with that defense, you just don't know.
When you watch, real quick, because you're a football guy, when you watch that defense on film, is it just unfixable, or is there some discipline that could be added to it that would help, or is it just a complete lack of talent?
You can always help with discipline. That's one of the things so I'm in Gainesville, so Florida and LSU are facing lots of questions about their defenses right now. And Florida's is more of a talent issue than LSU's, but both of them have things they could clean up. Everybody has stuff they could clean up. But yeah, Ole Miss needs to get better defensively. But the thing is, they should still be good enough defensively to beat the Arkansas and the Mississippi States and the Vanderbilts and the Kentuckys, and when those teams are equally or maybe a little more talented, depending, because Ole Miss's offense is so good. I mean, Ole Miss's offense has elite players on it. And one guy, and I know he's probably taken some heat, is it Ben Brown as the center, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So he moved from guard. He's made a huge difference for that offense. And I realize he's gotten some flack for a couple high snaps, but you got to understand, this is a guy who can physically handle those monsters that they're putting over him at that position. And that's something that wasn't necessarily the case before. So he'll get the snapping part down. He'll get that right. the fact that he is so capably handling these 320-pound dudes getting put in front of him, that is a huge thing. I mean, I think Ben Brown, Kenny Yeboah, and Matt Corral are the three most important players at Ole Miss right now.
Yeah, you mentioned that about Brown, and you're exactly right, because they came in without the benefit of a spring, with the goofy offseason, and they saw, hey, we need to move Brown to center. He makes more sense there. They think he's an NFL center. And, yeah, he had a couple of bad snaps, and the guy was almost in tears at points in the fourth quarter. But
well, I felt so bad for him. But I tell you what, think about the talent he's facing against Alabama. Think about what they're putting on the other side of him.
In ways.
And he is doing a thing that is unfamiliar to him, which is snapping, and then blocking those people and blocking them well. So I think he's one to really watch. And, I'm sure the NFL scouts have noticed, hey, wait a second, this guy's pretty good.
I think what's going to be interesting with Kiffin, as we wrap up that part of it real quick, is I'm fascinated to see what it looks like when the pandemic portion of this is kind of over, where the dead period's over, and he can bring kids in. Kids are watching them on TV and getting excited. I mean, I'm already getting that feedback from guys that I talk text with or whatever. They're getting excited. If he can bring in that kind of elite talent, you can win anywhere. It's been proven in college.
Oh yeah,
What.
Got to get the edge rushers excited too. Yeah, because if I'm a tight end, if I'm a receiver, if I'm a back, if I'm a quarterback, I'm pumped. when an Ole Miss coach calls me, I'm like, oh boy, that looks awesome. But got to get that edge rusher excited too. And look, this is how recruiting works. You know this, Neil. These coaches can spin it any way they want to. And the way you spin it if you're Ole Miss is, hey, it doesn't look so good right now, but if you came, it would look a lot better, and you could play right away.
Speaking of edge guys, Georgia has them in droves. They get Alabama on Saturday. I'm not going to keep you long at all, but I am curious to get just kind of your quick thoughts on Georgia and Alabama. I was doing a podcast with Chris Landry a few minutes ago. He thinks this might be meeting number 1 of 3 between these two teams this year.
I said the same thing on a show earlier this morning. And, people may say, well, that's crazy. It's really not. I mean, through 3 weeks, they certainly look like the best two teams in the SEC. And then, do you have any confidence that the Big 12 is going to put a team in the playoff? Yep. Is there any confidence the Pac-12 is going to put a team in the playoff? I think Ohio State, if they do what they're supposed to do, will be there. I think Clemson looks like the best team in the country right now. Yeah. So you got those 2 spots probably filled. And I would say if another ACC team like Notre Dame were to dethrone Clemson, they would deserve the spot as well. But so that's probably 2 spots filled. But yeah, let's say they play a double overtime game this weekend and then go to Atlanta and meet again, and neither of them's lost another game, and they play another tight game, but the result is flipped. Why not put them both in there at that point? Georgia's fascinating to me because in a year that it doesn't seem like anybody can play defense, they're playing great defense. And these are basically the same guys as last year. They joke and they call them the no-name defense, and even though they were all very highly recruited for the most part,
every one of them,
but they boa constrictor you if you let them, and that's what happened at Tennessee. Is Jarrett Guarantano had a pretty good first half throwing the ball, and then Georgia just said, nope, no more. We're not going to let you run it all. You're going to have to throw every down. Now we're going to be in your face. And we're going to make you make mistakes. And it's just, when that happens, it gets very frustrating for an offense. But then you got Alabama's offense, which, as you saw last weekend, they have an answer for almost everything. I mean, they have great backs, fantastic receivers. Mac Jones is a really good quarterback. I don't think there's been a ton of drop off after Tua. I think Max wound up, taking that spot and running with it. And then they got fantastic line. They got good tight ends. They have everything. So you'd think if there's any offense that can score some points on Georgia, it would be this one. And if they can't, I'm not sure anybody can. That's, Florida needs to look at that and be like, oh, if Alabama can't score on Georgia, Florida's going to have a problem because Alabama's defense is probably a little better than Florida's. Maybe. I don't know. Florida's defense did play Ole Miss better than Alabama's.
Yeah, they're pretty similar, really. Last thing, I hate to bring up a bad memory for you, but I'm a fellow mayonnaise hater.
Yeah, I made a bet on my podcast. For those who don't know, this is when Pittsburgh was 3-0. And Pittsburgh's got some really good players, especially on the D line. Kenny Pickett's a senior quarterback, fourth-year starter. I'm thinking, okay, these guys are doing great. NC State was coming off getting blown out by a Virginia Tech team that was missing like 20 players and their defensive coordinator. And I go, okay, there is no way that NC State's gonna beat Pitt in this game. And my co-host, Ari Wasserman, who's a gambling guy, is like, no, you don't understand. Gambling people understand you never take Pitt under any circumstance. If you think Pitt will win, Pitt will always lose. If you think Pitt will lose, they will always win. So you can't do that. And he said, we started the conversation with the question, is Pitt legit? And I said, yes, they are too legit to Pitt. And I said, I will eat a spoonful of mayonnaise, which is the thing I hate more than anything on earth, if Pitt loses to NC State. And Pitt lost to NC State. And so I had to pay up on last Friday's episode, which you could listen to on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, wherever you go. Just type in Andy Staples Show. And I tried. I did. I put the spoon in my mouth. I had the mayonnaise in my mouth. And my body instantly moved to protect me, which I appreciate. My body said, no, we will not have the devil's pomade in our system. And it just made sure I gagged that stuff out very quickly. It took 3 heaves, but it got out. And now I've learned my lesson. I will never, ever trust Pitt. And I don't have to try mayonnaise again because I know my body will recoil. And thank God for that.
I had a good friend send me a DM with the video and said, have you watched this? And I said, no. And she said, you got to watch.
It's a little triggering for the fellow mayonnaise haters.
And I said, I can't. And by then, of course, now I'm having to watch.
Then you have to.
The car wreck thing. And I suffered with you. I'll just say that.
Did you watch the slow-mo? Because the slow-mo is the best part.
I did. I've seen it all, and everybody else is laughing at you. And I have empathy, sympathy, all of that. There was no laugh at all for me. It was just torture watching you go through.
Listen, Neil, I deserved it. I deserved it. I trusted Pitt. I should have known better. And look, just to reinforce the lesson, Pitt misses an extra point to lose to Boston College last week. It's like, okay, if the mayonnaise didn't teach you, this will.
Yeah, leave the Panthers alone. That's the lesson, and never bet mayonnaise. Just
well, that one's over. We're gonna come up with a new one now. I don't know there's nothing I can do that'll be that interesting after that.
No, it was really, really good, and so was your story today. Really enjoyed it. I know the Ole Miss fans listening to this are already talking about it on my message board and other places. So thanks very much for the time. Really appreciate it. Take care of yourself.
Thanks, Neil.